When Sylvester received the long-awaited news that he had been admitted to study chemical engineering at the University of Benin, it was a moment of pride and joy for both him and his mother. His mother, Mrs. Evelyn, was a strong-willed woman of 46 years. She had raised Sylvester on her own since he was a toddler, working tirelessly as a schoolteacher to provide him with the best she could afford. Her joy was unmatched the day that admission letter arrived, but it was also accompanied by deep concern. Mrs. Evelyn knew that the university environment, while exciting and filled with opportunities, also came with its fair share of temptations and risks. She had seen it all, stories of young students getting mixed up with the wrong crowd, missing classes, and sometimes making life-altering mistakes. She didn't want that for her only son. So, even before Sylvester began his journey as an undergraduate, she made one decision firm and final: he would live within the school campus. She didn't just suggest it, she insisted. She practically begged and pressured him until he agreed. To her, the school hostel represented a form of protection. It was a regulated environment, supervised by school authorities, with rules that encouraged discipline and reduced the likelihood of harmful distractions. She believed that within the campus premises, her son would be shielded from unnecessary dangers, the kind she feared but couldn't always name. Sylvester, however, did not share his mother's perspective. He appreciated her concern, but the reality of hostel life was far from what he had imagined or desired. From the moment he moved in, he began to feel restricted. The rules were strict: no late-night movements, limited visiting hours, and a firm policy against visits from members of the opposite gender. Privacy was a luxury he couldn't afford in a space shared with multiple students. The communal bathrooms and kitchens were almost always crowded, and the hostel's general cleanliness left much to be desired. Most of all, Sylvester felt stifled. He longed to experience university life in its full colors: social gatherings, independence, and a personal space where he could express himself freely. But under the hostel's rules, such freedom was a dream too far. He endured it for a whole academic session. Throughout his first year, he kept up with the hostel life as best as he could, attending lectures, participating in group assignments, and following the routines expected of a typical campus student. Yet, the desire to live on his own terms never left him. By the time he began his second year, 200 level, Sylvester had made up his mind. Without informing his mother, he packed his things and moved out of the campus hostel. Along with a friend he trusted, he rented a self-contained apartment in a nearby area called Echosodi, just a short distance from the university. It was a modest space, but it offered everything the hostel couldn't: privacy, freedom, and a feeling of adulthood he had craved for so long. He knew his mother would not approve, which is why he kept the move a secret. To her, he was still safely tucked away within the school's protective walls. But in reality, Sylvester had stepped into a world where every choice was his to make, and every consequence, his to bear. Echosodi was a name that carried weight in hushed conversations among students of the University of Benin. It was a neighborhood located just on the edge of the university's boundary, and while many students lived there due to the affordable housing options and its closeness to campus, it had earned a reputation that made many cautious. To the average first-year student, especially one not deeply rooted in the campus scene, the area might appear just like any other busy student environment. But to those who had spent time on campus, Echosodi was known as a hotspot for unrest and street-related troubles. It was, as many would later learn, a place where lines were drawn not just by streets, but by the invisible boundaries of dangerous campus groups. When Sylvester moved to Echosodi at the start of his second year, he did so with little knowledge of its darker realities. He was more excited by the freedom that came with leaving the school's hostel system than he was concerned about safety. All he wanted was independence, privacy, and the ability to live on his own terms. He found all of that in the small self-contained apartment he shared with a friend. The rent was reasonable, the area was alive with other students, and he was finally out from under the strict regulations of hostel life. But unknown to him, that very freedom came at a cost he had not yet imagined. Echosodi, though busy and filled with students like him, was also known as a breeding ground for dangerous student groups that had taken control of certain territories. These groups had been operating quietly and sometimes violently for years. Stories floated around campus of fights breaking out, robberies happening in the dark corners of the neighborhood, and students getting caught in the middle of situations they never signed up for. Most of these tales sounded like exaggerated campus rumors, until they became personal. Sylvester's first real encounter with the hidden dangers of Echosodi happened one evening that had started off like any other. He had stayed back late on campus due to a long practical session in the chemical engineering lab. Shortly after the class ended, the skies opened up and heavy rain poured down without warning. He waited for the rain to slow down, but when it became clear that it wouldn't stop anytime soon, he decided to make the walk home despite the weather. By the time he reached the main street leading into Echosodi, the sun had long disappeared and the narrow roads were soaked and nearly deserted. As Sylvester walked carefully, trying to avoid large puddles and muddy patches, two men suddenly emerged from a dark corner of the street. Their appearance was intimidating, tall, rugged, and with an energy that immediately made Sylvester uncomfortable. One of them stepped forward and blocked his path, demanding to know who he was and what he was doing in the area. Startled but trying to remain calm, Sylvester explained politely that he was a student of the University of Benin, and that he was just coming back from lectures. He pointed toward his apartment, just a few blocks ahead, hoping that his explanation would be enough to let him go. But the men weren't interested in explanations. What Sylvester didn't realize at that moment was that the two men were not random strangers. They were part of a feared group known on campus as the Black Axe. These groups, often called confraternities in university slang, were known for their violent activities and territorial control over certain student areas. Their interest in Sylvester had nothing to do with his identity. They had seen him walking alone and saw an opportunity. Before he could even react, one of the men demanded for everything he had on him, his phone, his watch, and his wallet. Sylvester, shocked and confused, hesitated. That brief pause was a mistake. Within seconds, the men descended on him with force. He was pushed to the ground and hit multiple times. His phone was snatched from his pocket, his wristwatch torn off, and his wallet taken. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but to Sylvester, it felt like hours. By the time they walked away, laughing and disappearing into the night, Sylvester was left on the side of the road, soaked from the rain, bruised, and shaken to his core. Pain throbbed through his body, but even more than the physical pain was the overwhelming feeling of regret. As he slowly got back on his feet and limped toward his apartment, one thing became painfully clear to him: he had made a terrible mistake. The freedom he had longed for, the independence he had fought to get, had exposed him to a kind of danger he had never experienced before. Back in the school hostel, life had been uncomfortable, yes, but it had been safe. There had been rules and regulations, but there had also been boundaries and protection. In Echosodi, those safety nets were gone. When he finally reached his apartment, Sylvester looked at himself in the mirror. His face was swollen, his shirt torn, and his spirit broken. That night, as he lay on his bed nursing his wounds and replaying the attack over and over in his head, he realized that the decisions we make for comfort and freedom sometimes come with a price. And for him, that price had been his peace of mind. 5 days had passed since Sylvester was attacked in the streets of Echosodi. Though the bruises on his skin were beginning to heal, the memory of that night was still fresh in his mind. Each time he walked home or stepped outside after dark, he couldn't shake off the anxiety that clung to him. The streets that once felt ordinary now seemed filled with hidden eyes and silent watchers. Still, he tried to move on with his daily life, attending lectures, reading, and trying his best not to think about that evening. But deep down, he knew something had changed. He was no longer the same confident, carefree young man who had moved into Echosodi in search of freedom. One Saturday afternoon, hoping to lift his spirits, Sylvester decided to visit a small bar located along Edo Street, a busy area not far from his neighborhood. A big football match was scheduled for that day, and the bar, known for its large television screen and energetic crowd, was the perfect place to enjoy the game. It was supposed to be a moment of escape, a way to feel normal again. The bar was crowded, noisy, and filled with students and locals alike. Sylvester found a seat in the corner and focused on the screen, trying to drown his worries in the excitement of the match. For a while, it worked. He even managed a small smile during a goal celebration. But that sense of peace was short-lived. From across the room, a familiar voice called out. Sylvester turned and immediately recognized one of the two men who had attacked him earlier in the week. His heart sank. The man was with a few others, all of whom shared a certain look, intense eyes, confident swagger, and a quiet presence that suggested they were not ordinary students. It was clear they were members of the same feared confraternity, the group known around campus as Black Axe. There was no use pretending he hadn't seen them. The bar had gone quieter, and some people had already begun watching the scene unfold. Sylvester stood up slowly and walked over, trying to hide the nervousness in his steps. The men didn't waste time. They surrounded him and began questioning him in hushed but firm tones, asking who he was, where he stayed, and why he was moving around their area without permission. Sylvester, once again, explained that he was just a student, living nearby, and had only come to watch the match. He tried to keep his answers short and respectful, hoping not to provoke them. But the interrogation soon took a different turn. After a few minutes, one of the court members pointed at the drinks on the table, bottles of soft drinks and a few snacks, and said, "You'll pay for all of this." Sylvester slowly reached into his pocket and brought out all the money he had on him, 170 naira. It was just enough for his transport fare and perhaps a small snack later in the evening. The drinks and snacks on the table clearly cost much more. The men weren't interested in excuses. Seeing their faces tighten with anger, Sylvester knew they were not bluffing. He turned to the woman who owned the bar, a middle-aged woman who had been watching from behind the counter. He begged her to allow him to return later with the rest of the money. But she wasn't convinced. He explained again, promising on his name and status as a student that he would return. The woman thought for a moment, then pointed at the textbooks he was carrying. "Drop your books here. When you bring my balance, you get them back." Sylvester had no choice. Those textbooks were essential to his course, they weren't easy to replace, and he needed them for his next class. But in that moment, they were the only thing of value he had. He handed them over and walked out of the bar, his pride once again bruised. Later that evening, after borrowing money from his roommate, he returned to Edo Street and cleared the balance. The woman returned his textbooks with a nod, and he left without saying a word. But from that day forward, he avoided the area as much as possible. Unfortunately, avoiding a location was not enough to make the problem disappear. The court members had taken a special interest in Sylvester, and their harassment didn't end at the bar. In the days that followed, he began to receive direct warnings from them, casual threats on the road, harsh whispers in passing, and even unsettling knocks on his door late at night. It was clear they were keeping tabs on him. But the final blow came when one of them confronted him on a quiet afternoon and made a disturbing demand. Sylvester was told, in no uncertain terms, that going forward, he would have to surrender a portion of the monthly allowance he received from his mother. If he failed to cooperate, the consequences would be serious. The threat was not loud, but it was chillingly clear his safety was now at risk. That evening, Sylvester sat in his room, hands trembling as he held his phone. Enough was enough. He couldn't keep living like this, afraid, pressured, and unsure of what each new day would bring. He thought about going to the school authorities or even the police, but he knew the complexities that came with such a move. These groups had a strong grip in certain areas, and dealing with them through official channels often made things worse. Then, he remembered someone, an old friend he had met during a campus orientation program. The friend was well connected, known for moving with influence, and, most importantly, was a respected figure in one of the most powerful confraternities on campus, the Air Lords. Desperate and with nowhere else to turn, Sylvester picked up his phone and made the call. After the terrifying threats and the constant pressure he had been under, Sylvester finally gathered the courage to reach out to the one person he felt could help, his old acquaintance who was known to be a highly placed member of a powerful student group on campus, often referred to in whispers as the Air Lords. The two had met during an orientation event in his first year, and though they had not been close friends, Sylvester remembered the calm authority the young man carried. It was a desperate decision, but Sylvester had run out of safer options. When he explained everything to the Air Lord member, how he had been robbed, harassed at the bar, and forced to live in fear, the young man listened carefully and promised to look into the situation. True to his word, within a few days, the Air Lord had gathered information and confirmed what Sylvester had feared. The individuals troubling him were indeed affiliated with the Black Axe Confraternity, a group known across campus for their bold and often intimidating presence. The airlord member told Sylvester that the situation was dangerous and that the only way to guarantee safety would be for him to join the airlords. The offer was tempting. After all, safety was what Sylvester had been desperately seeking, but it came with a heavy price. Joining such a group was a serious decision, one that went far beyond just wearing certain colors or keeping new company. It meant pledging loyalty, becoming part of a structure that had its own rules, expectations, and consequences. It meant stepping into a world he wasn't sure he could ever live again. Despite the fear and pressure, Sylvester made a decision that took great courage. He refused. He didn't want to live his life constantly looking over his shoulder or becoming part of something that could cost him his future. He believed that reporting the matter to the right authorities was the right thing to do. So, with a trembling voice and a determined heart, he reported the harassment to the campus security operatives. But things didn't go as planned. Somehow, word got out that Sylvester had spoken to the authorities. Maybe someone talked. Maybe someone was watching. Whatever the case, the Black Axe members soon found out, and their response was chilling. They told him outright that they were no longer interested in his money. Instead, they vowed to silence him permanently. The tone of the threats changed. They were no longer just warnings. They were promises. Sylvester couldn't sleep at his apartment anymore. Every creak in the hallway, every footstep outside his window made his heart race. He began sleeping elsewhere, sometimes with friends far from the neighborhood, sometimes in hidden corners of campus, never staying in the same place too long. He avoided Echosodi completely, barely even attending his classes. He lived each day in fear, waiting for the worst. Then, one afternoon, while he was attending a lecture, his phone rang. It was one of his hostel mates, speaking in hurried, frightened tones. They told him that some fierce-looking men had invaded the hostel and was looking for him. Sylvester's blood ran cold. He didn't need anyone to spell it out for him, he knew who they were. The danger was no longer a distant threat. It had arrived at his doorstep. Not long after that incident, the entire campus erupted into chaos. A violent clash broke out between two of the most feared confraternities, the Black Axe and the Airlords. Reports spread quickly that the very same Airlord member Sylvester had confided in, the one who had promised to protect him, had been attacked and brought down by members of the Black Axe group. That tragic event set off a wave of retaliation. The Airlords responded with equal force, and in the crossfire, a well-known member of the Black Axe group, someone nicknamed Galaxy, was also brought down. Galaxy, a familiar face around campus, owned a popular barbershop near the school gates. His fall marked a turning point in the conflict. One act of violence led to another. The situation escalated rapidly. More students were caught in the middle. Innocent lives were affected. Panic spread like wildfire. For Sylvester, the writing was on the wall. Even though he had not joined any confraternity, he knew he could still be seen as an enemy by association. The fact that he had spoken to an airlord about his problems, and that the confrontation had grown so serious afterward, could lead others to assume he had chosen a side. In the minds of those seeking revenge, facts rarely mattered, only perceptions did. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Without wasting another day, Sylvester packed his bags and left the school quietly. He didn't tell anyone except his closest friend. He boarded a bus and traveled home, his heart pounding with fear and regret. When he arrived, he broke down in front of his mother and told her everything: the move to Echosodi, the harassment, the threats, the attack at the bar, and finally, the chaos that had engulfed the school. His mother listened in horror, tears streaming down her face as her worst fears unfolded before her. She had warned him, had insisted on him staying in the hostel for a reason. Now, hearing all that had happened, she knew they had to act fast. She began making phone calls and used every connection she had to secure him a transfer. Eventually, she succeeded. Sylvester was offered admission into a different university, far away from the University of Benin, and in a completely different state. Sylvester never returned to his former school. He left behind a chapter filled with painful lessons, about peer pressure, about decisions made too quickly, and about the silent dangers that sometimes lurk behind freedom. He was lucky to escape with his life and a second chance to pursue his education in peace. What stayed with him the most, however, was the knowledge that he had walked away without joining any confraternity, despite the fear, the intimidation, and the temptation of protection. In the end, Sylvester's story became a powerful reminder of why young people must say no to cultism, no matter what. No matter the promises. No matter the pressure. No matter the pain. It is a path that rarely ends well. Let this story serve as a message to every student. True strength lies in walking away, not in following the crowd. Say no to cultism. Your life, your dreams, and your future are far more valuable than any false sense of power.